I'd first like to thank all of the individuals and organizations involved in providing humanitarian assistance for the Syrian crisis. Working in an active conflict zone is incredibly dangerous, but also desperately needed. So we thank you and we support you. Today's hearing in the subcommittee's fourth hearing that focuses specifically on the Syrian humanitarian crisis. It has been an issue we have been following closely since the fighting in Syria began over 5 years ago, and until the administration gets serious about developing a comprehensive plan to end the conflict, it will unfortunately be an issue we will continue to revisit. The numbers are truly staggering. By most estimates, there have been at least 250,000 Syrians killed, and possibly as much as nearly 500,000. Nearly 5 million Syrians have fled to neighboring countries like Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan. There are nearly 7 million internally displaced Syrians, and more than 13.5 million people are in need of assistance, with about 5.5 million people in besieged and hard-to-reach areas. We've convened this hearing today to see how we can maximize our efforts and limit risks when providing humanitarian assistance. In addition to the $5 billion already provided, Secretary Kerry announced earlier this week $439 million in additional humanitarian assistance, and the President's budget request for fiscal year 2017 seeks nearly $2.1 billion through accounts that addresses the humanitarian impact of this crisis. This is a lot to ask of the U.S. taxpayer, especially when we know that there is no end in sight to this terrible crisis. And that is why Congress must conduct oversight to ensure that this assistance is being used as effectively and efficiently as possible. And that's why I was pleased to be joined by Ranking Member Deutsch, Jerry Connolly, and Ron DeSantis in requesting a GAO review of our Syrian humanitarian assistance program. This report focuses solely on our programs inside Syria. While with the U.S. no longer having a presence in the country, we have to rely on remote programs and coordinating with implementing partners. We recognize this brings challenges, but these challenges also make it more important for our agencies to mitigate all risks, because situations like these make our efforts more vulnerable to waste, fraud, abuse, and diversion. And that is precisely what GAO and USAID's Inspector General have found, that we have weaknesses in our humanitarian aid programs in Syria, and both state and USAID could improve their fraud oversight. GAO's review found that most of the implementing partners that we work with to provide humanitarian assistance into Syria do not assess the risk of fraud. Why is this important? Well, we will hear from the Inspector General that her office has opened 25 cases to investigate allegations of abuse of USAID funds with 3 common fraud schemes. This obviously raises concerns not only with how USAID and state oversee our assistance programs, but it raises concerns regarding the checks and balances our implementing partners have in place as well. We rely heavily on our partners, as does the UN, where 75% of all of our assistance is funneled through. And if they are lax in their oversight, we run the risk of wider loss due to waste, fraud, and abuse and diversion. What GAO also found is that not only do most implementing partners not assess the risk of fraud, but their controls for mitigating the risk of fraud and loss were not informed by a risk assessment. So it's likely that they either don't know what they are looking for or looking in the wrong place. And that is why GAO has recommended that USAID and states strengthen their fraud oversight themselves. But they must also require implementing partners to conduct fraud assessment and to ensure monitors are properly trained. These are common sense recommendations for our efforts in Syria, but they're also common sense for state and USAID across the board. We provide large sums of money and assistance every year and administer very large programs. We need to be doing everything we can to minimize the risk of waste, fraud, abuse, and diversion. It is also important because we do send most of our assistance through the UN and from there, we have less oversight, less transparency. If we can work with our implementing partners to strengthen how they assess the risk of fraud and how they improve their oversight, we have a better chance of maximizing the humanitarian assistance response across the board. State and USAID are doing a good job with its humanitarian response, but we can always seek to do better. We all want to ensure that we're being proper stewards of the American taxpayer dollars, but we're also promoting our core ideals and values as Americans by doing what we can to help those suffering from the ongoing crisis in Syria. So I'm eager to hear from our witnesses on how we can accomplish both of these objectives without sacrificing our ability to assist those in dire need. And with that, I apologize to our ranking member for my lateness, and he is recognized.